Hello everyone, tonight we're going to begin in a place that feels too heavy for words, a funeral. There's the scent of lilies in the air, too sweet, almost cloying. Black shoes on stone floors. Whispers that hover like flies. But what if I told you that this wasn't just about mourning a man? What if I told you this was the day I found out I had never truly known the man I'd loved for 27 years? You might not survive what I'm about to share without clutching your own heart a few times. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening tonight, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It always warms me to see how far this little circle of stories reaches. Now turn off the lights, maybe get a fan going for some soft noise, and let's dive into tonight's journey together. The day of Stephen Alden's funeral was cruel in a quiet way. Montpelier skies were gray but not stormy, just a heavy sheet of clouds that seemed to lean into your chest. It didn't feel like weather, it felt like judgment. I got there early, too early. I had spent hours picking out what to wear. Nothing flashy. A black wool coat, modest heels, a veil I didn't really need but wore anyway because it felt like armor. I was, after all, the widow. I had played that role so convincingly for nearly 3 decades. Stephen and I had a quiet life. No kids, not because we didn't want them, at least not me, but because I couldn't. And Stephen, well, he said I was enough. That was his line always. Josie, you're more than enough. He traveled a lot, said it was work logistics business consulting. 6 months here, 6 months gone. It had always been that way. He said he hated cell phones. Preferred face-to-face, said technology ruined authenticity. I found it charming in the beginning. Now I realize it was convenient. When I stepped into that church, I expected polite nods and familiar co-workers I never got to meet. I expected to feel alone, but I didn't expect to be watched. Not with pity, with something else. Like I was a stranger in someone else's home, or worse, a trespasser. That's when I saw her. She stood near the altar, dressed in black too, but sharper. Her hands clenched around a tissue she hadn't used. Her expression wasn't grief, it was fury contained just enough for church. Beside her were 2 people grown, a man and a woman. The man in his 30s maybe looked at me like I'd just keyed his car. The woman wouldn't even look at me at all. I didn't understand. Not until after the service. I was halfway down the aisle when I heard him sharp, loud, bitter. She has the nerve to show her face here. I turned. It was the man her son I'd find out later. His finger pointed directly at me as if I were the villain in a courtroom drama. His voice rose. You destroyed our family. You were nothing but a mistress. And now you show up for sympathy, mistress. That word cracked through the room like lightning. Whispers, scoffs. Someone stifled a laugh. I looked at the woman, the one by the altar. Her face didn't flicker with surprise. She knew who I was, or rather, who she thought I was. The grief on her face was different now. Sharpened, personal. I stood frozen. I wanted to speak, but my mouth felt glued shut. My legs did what they knew flee. I stumbled out into the cold Montpelier air breath fogging as I clutched my coat to my chest, shaking. That night I sat on the floor of my living room with the lights off and shoes still on. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even blinking. I was processing. 27 years. Holidays, birthdays, vacations. All of it now under suspicion. The man I loved had a whole other life, a wife, children, and apparently I was the other woman. I had no idea. That's what cut the deepest. Not just the betrayal, but the realization that everyone assumed I had known, that I was complicit, that I had lived in this lovely house in Montpelier with my eyes wide open to the deception. The scent of Stephen's cologne still lingered on his coat by the door. I should have thrown it out. I couldn't. I walked through our home like a ghost, touching things like they belonged to someone else. Because suddenly, they did. I found our wedding album in the closet. I flipped through the pages with numb fingers trying to read his eyes, trying to find the lie. But Stephen had always been good at smiling. That night, I got a text from someone I considered a friend. "Can't believe what you did. Don't contact me again." That was it. Then came the photos online. Someone had snapped a shot at the church, my face blurred but unmistakable. The mistress who came to collect. Another, she waited for him to die so she could cash out. I wasn't sleeping, just staring at the ceiling, wondering when the world had turned inside out. Then came the email inbox full of venom. Strangers, neighbors, people I hadn't heard from in years. Some cursed me, some judged me. None asked me if I had known. I checked our financial records the next day. Wire transfers to a woman in upstate New York. A second insurance policy. Travel receipts that matched his business trips to the day. There it was, the truth, cold, printed, undeniable. And in that moment, the Josie who loved quietly, who never asked too many questions, who waited patiently for a man she thought was faithful, that version of me. She died too. What replaced her, I didn't know yet, but I was going to find out. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after the funeral. Not really. Just laid there in my bed in Montpellier, staring up at the ceiling like it could give me answers. I kept thinking, how could I have missed it? How could someone live 2 entire lives and leave no trace? But the truth is, Stephen Alden left clues. I just didn't know they were clues. The suitcase he always packed himself. The birthdays he always managed to miss because of client emergencies. The unexplained bank withdrawals I chalked up to investment meetings. People always say hindsight is 20/20. What they don't say is that hindsight can feel like a betrayal by your own memory. The first time I left the house after the funeral, I went to the grocery store. I needed milk and paper towels. That's it. I walked in and immediately felt like every set of eyes belonged to someone who had read the online posts. Maybe they had, maybe they hadn't, but paranoia doesn't need proof. It just needs doubt. A woman in the produce aisle leaned close to another, whispered something, then both glanced at me. I smiled out of habit. They didn't smile back. By the time I reached checkout, my palms were sweating. I paid in cash and didn't wait for my change. The local paper ran a piece the next morning. Secret wife inherits estate after businessman's death. They didn't name names. They didn't have to. Small towns like Montpelier don't need details to start fires. Just a spark. I became that woman, the one who seduced a married man, the one who stole everything from the real family, the one who didn't belong. Funny thing though, I'd lived here longer than most of them. Volunteered at the community center, helped organize the winter coat drive, hosted a book club that nobody ever came to, but still, I was part of this town. Until I wasn't. I stopped answering calls. I stopped checking my email. I left the TV off and only listened to classical radio because it didn't talk back. And every time I passed the hall mirror, I avoided my own eyes. Because a part of me wondered, had I really been so blind? Here's something they don't warn you about when you grieve someone who betrayed you. Your grief gets wrapped in shame. You feel guilty for missing them. And somehow, even guiltier for still loving them. I missed Stephen's laugh. His slow way of stirring tea. The way he kissed my shoulder when he passed behind me in the kitchen. But every time I remembered those moments, another voice in my head screamed, that wasn't real. And maybe it wasn't. On the 3rd day after the funeral, someone spray painted my garage door. Liar! Red letters 6 inches tall, dripping like they bled. I stood there in my bathrobe, arms crossed, staring at it. I didn't cry. I didn't even curse. I just felt small. Like I'd shrunk to the size of the truth. A neighbor offered to help paint over it. I said no. Let them see it. Let the world look me in the face and call me what it wanted. Because here's the thing, when everyone already sees you as the villain, you stop trying to explain yourself. I closed the door and locked it. Every door, every window. I unplugged the landline. I stopped opening the blinds. For a week, I lived in a dim, muted house with the ghost of a man who once told me I was his whole world. And I believed him. Then one afternoon, I found a letter on my porch. No return address. Just a plain envelope taped to the screen door. Inside was a copy of Stephen's will. The updated one. The one where I was named the sole beneficiary. There was a sticky note on top. Did you ask him to change this, or did you just smile pretty? No name. No signature. But the handwriting looked male. Angry. Slanted to the left. It had to be one of them Elaine's children. Noah or Rachel. I poured myself a glass of wine and stared at the paper until the words blurred. Retirement accounts. Investment portfolios. Real estate holdings. Primary residence. To be transferred to Josie Halpern. That's my name, by the way. I hadn't said it out loud in days. It felt foreign in my mouth, like something that belonged to a woman I no longer was. I drank the wine, then poured another. Then I opened the cabinet above the fridge and pulled down Stephen's financial folder, the one I hadn't dared to touch in years. It was organized. Of course it was. He'd labeled every tab: tax returns, property deeds, joint accounts. But one folder was unlabeled. Inside were scanned documents, contracts, lease agreements for a property in Syracuse. That's where they lived, Elaine and the kids. He paid the mortgage on that house every month, like clockwork. He covered health insurance for Elaine, college tuition for Rachel. He even had a car registered in her name. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling again. Not for answers this time, but because I was too exhausted to hold my head up. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. This was a life. A life I never knew existed. A life built alongside mine, using the same tools, the same promises, the same man. And suddenly, I felt like I was the affair. Here's something strange I learned that night. Betrayal doesn't burn. It freezes. It turns your bones to glass. You walk carefully, afraid even your breath might shatter you. I crawled into bed with Stephen's old sweatshirt. It smelled like laundry detergent and lies, and I whispered to the dark, "Tell me this was love. Please, just tell me that much." But of course the dark doesn't answer. It only listens. The letter from the lawyer came 2 days later. Formal envelope, cream-colored thick, like it was trying to look important. It didn't need to try. The return address alone made my hands shake. Alden and Granger Legal Services, Stephen's firm. Inside, the details were clear. The reading of Stephen Alden's will was set for the following Wednesday. Downtown Montpelier, 10 a.m. sharp. There was a small note at the bottom, attendance encouraged but not required. I read that part 3 times. Encouraged but not required. That little phrase felt like a dare. I almost didn't go. I paced around the house for an hour the morning of keys in my hand, shoes on, jacket off. I kept thinking what could possibly be in that room that would make any of this better. But something, maybe closure, maybe foolish curiosity, pushed me out the door. The law office sat in one of those cold brick buildings that smells like printer toner and stale coffee. I stepped inside and instantly felt like I'd entered a courtroom. Everyone already had their sides picked. Elaine was already there, sitting stiff-backed, her eyes hollow. Noah and Rachel flanked her like security guards. Their expressions didn't shift when they saw me. Not anger, not even hate, just disdain. I nodded a polite, quiet gesture. No one returned it. I sat in the back, far from them, close to the window, just in case I needed to escape. The lawyer was a man named Mr. Cutter. Silver hair, tan suit, and the kind of voice that sounded like he gave bad news for a living. He started reading. Stephen's estate was significant. Multiple properties, retirement accounts, investment portfolios. More than I ever knew about. We'd lived comfortably, sure, but not like that. Apparently, Stephen had been living 2 very different financial lives. I got the frugal version. Elaine got the silent sponsor. And now, well, we were all about to get the truth. The first line of the will to Elaine Alden. I leave the residence located at 14 Sycamore Street, Syracuse, New York, in recognition of the life we built and the family we raised. Elaine's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't nod, didn't flinch. To Rachel Alden, I leave a trust in the amount of $125,000 to be used at her discretion. Rachel didn't react. To Noah Alden, I leave a trust in the amount of $125,000 and the title to the 2017 BMW registered in my name. Noah scoffed, almost laughed. A car, he muttered. Then came the part I was dreading. To Josie Halpern, I leave the remainder of my estate, including, but not limited to, the marital home in Montpelier, all retirement funds, investments, and personal savings. The room fell completely silent. I didn't breathe. Noah stood. "Are you kidding me?" he shouted, his face flushed. "She gets everything." Elaine didn't stop him this time. She's not even his wife. She's a mistress, an afterthought. Rachel crossed her arms, her voice cold. He was our father. She was a footnote. I tried to speak. I opened my mouth, but my throat closed up. The lawyer raised a hand. This was his legally witnessed, notarized will, last updated 1 year ago. All medical records affirm his full cognitive capacity at the time of revision. They didn't care. He was manipulated, Noah said, voice rising. She pressured him, lied to him, took advantage of him while he was dying. Elaine finally looked at me, not with hatred, not even anger, just deep, infinite sadness. Like I was the final nail in a coffin she'd already buried twice. And somehow, that look hurt more than Noah's shouting. I stood. "I didn't know," I said quietly. "I didn't know about you, about any of this." Rachel's laugh was sharp. "Of course you didn't, because ignorance makes it all okay, right?" I didn't answer. I just walked out. Down the steps, into the cold Vermont air. The snow had started again, light and dry, flurrying in gusts that felt like they wanted to erase the world. I drove home in silence. No music, no thoughts. Just white noise in my head and the ache of a truth I couldn't change. That night, I sat in the kitchen holding the will in my hands. I hadn't earned it. I hadn't asked for it. But it was mine now. All of it. And I didn't know what to do with any of it. Here's the thing. No one tells you about inheriting wealth you didn't expect. You don't feel lucky. You feel dirty. Like every dollar has someone else's grief stuck to it. I didn't sleep that night either. Instead, I reread Stephen's last message to me, a handwritten note he'd left in his desk drawer. It said, "Josie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I wish I had the words to explain everything, but I know I can't make this right. I just hope you know you were never second place. I loved you in every way that mattered." I stared at that line, every way that mattered. What did that even mean? Did it mean honesty didn't matter, that truth didn't? Was love enough if it was built on a lie? I didn't know. All I knew was I wasn't just grieving Stephen anymore. I was grieving the version of him I thought existed, the life I thought we had, and the woman I thought I was. That woman was gone, and whoever was left in her place would have to figure out how to carry the weight of someone else's secrets while the world watched and judged. I didn't open the front door for 2 days after the will reading, not because I was afraid of reporters or lawyers or even Elaine's children. No, it was something smaller but heavier. Shame. The kind that settles in your chest like a thick fog and makes everything in your house feel off. The light felt too bright. The carpet felt too loud. Even the refrigerator hum annoyed me. I remember standing in front of the mirror, brushing my teeth like it was the most ordinary morning in the world, and catching myself flinch when I made eye contact, like I was looking at a stranger, someone I didn't trust. The outside world wasn't any kinder. At the grocery store, a woman from the community garden gave me a sharp once-over and quickly turned her cart around. At the post office, 2 women I'd chatted with for years suddenly acted like I didn't exist. And when I stepped into the local pharmacy, the clerk, normally chatty, barely looked at me. It was subtle, but you feel it. The tension in a paused conversation, the averted glances, the quiet judgment. I wasn't just grieving Stephen. I was being tried in the court of public opinion and losing. The local newspaper didn't help. They ran a piece the day after the will was read. Secret beneficiary inherits majority of Alden estate. No name mentioned, but everyone knew. Montpelier wasn't a big place. The details were unmistakable. Online forums lit up. People I barely knew were suddenly legal experts dissecting my character, my clothes, my past. Someone even dug up a photo of me and Stephen at a fall festival 5 years ago, captioned it, "While his real family waited at home." I stopped reading the comments after that. I stopped answering the phone, too. Even the landline rang less and less. People didn't know what to say to me. Or maybe they did, and I just didn't want to hear it. Inside the house, things weren't easier. Stephen's slippers still sat by the back door. His toothbrush was in the cup in our bathroom. I should have thrown them out. I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I cleaned the kitchen, then the closets, then the attic. I didn't know what I was looking for, closure maybe, or a sign that some part of our life had been real. What I found instead was a folder buried in a drawer marked taxes. Inside were bank statements. I'd never seen rental contracts from Syracuse life insurance documents with two beneficiaries, Elaine and me. He'd thought of everything, covered every lie in layers of paper and ink. A part of me wanted to rip it all up, toss it into the fireplace, and be done with it. But I didn't. I read every page, every line, until my eyes burned and my hands ached. And after that, I just sat. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat. There's a peculiar stillness that comes after a storm of truth. It's not peaceful. It's hollow, like walking through a house that's been cleared out. You recognize the walls, the windows, but none of it feels like home anymore. That's what my life felt like now. Familiar, but empty. One afternoon, someone spray-painted the word liar across my garage door in red. I didn't even hear them do it. I found it the next morning while taking out the trash. I stood there for a while, trash bag in one hand, just staring at the letters. Neighbors peeked from curtains. No one came to help. A few hours later, someone knocked on the door. I thought for a second it might be Elaine, but it wasn't. It was Mrs. Finch from the library. She was in her 70s, wore bright pink lipstick, and always brought cinnamon gum to staff meetings. She held out a can of white paint and a brush. "I brought this," she said. "Thought you might want to cover it up." I didn't take it right away. After a long pause, I said, "Thank you." She didn't stay, just handed me the paint and left. It took me an hour to work up the energy, but I painted over the red letters. Each stroke felt like peeling something off my skin. I could have left it there, the paint, the quiet gesture. But that night, I opened my laptop and started making transfers. Anonymous donations. First to the Montpelier Food Pantry, then to the Women's Shelter, then to the Senior Center that hosted free classes for widows. Thousands of dollars sent without a name. Not to clear my conscience, not to seek redemption, but because giving away some of that poisoned inheritance felt like breathing again. Still, it didn't take long for people to notice. Someone posted screenshots of court filings online. "She's trying to buy forgiveness," the caption read. "Guilt money." Another comment, "Keep your dirty hands off our Father's name." The backlash came fast and mean. But for once I didn't respond. Not in public, not in private, not even in my head. Instead, I poured a cup of tea, sat by the window, and stared at the maple tree outside. It was bare now, winter stealing every leaf. But I knew spring would come. Eventually. And when it did, I wanted to be ready for it. Even if no one else believed in my version of the truth. I had to. Because if I didn't, then what was left of me? The decision to reach out to Elaine wasn't a brave one. It was the kind you make at 2:13 in the morning when the tea's gone cold and your hands are wrapped around a mug more out of muscle memory than comfort. The kind of decision that grows out of desperation, like an ache that won't let you sleep until you do something, anything, to dull it. I didn't want a confrontation. What I wanted was clarity, or maybe just to feel like I wasn't the only one drowning in the wreckage Stephen left behind. So I sent her a message. Simple, careful, polite. "I'm not looking for a fight. I just want to understand. If you're open to talking, I'd like to meet someplace neutral." I expected silence. Instead, I got a reply 52 minutes later. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Cafe Lantern in Northfield. Don't be late." I reread her response about 30 times. There was no warmth in it, no punctuation even, just a directive. But it was enough. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, watching shadows shift on the ceiling, replaying every possible version of our conversation. Most of them ended with her throwing coffee in my face. One ended with her flipping the table over. None ended well. Still I went. Cafe Lantern was one of those places with mismatched chairs, exposed brick, and baristas who wore beanies indoors. It smelled like cinnamon and ink. Not hostile, not welcoming, just neutral. Elaine was already there when I arrived. She wore no makeup. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled into a low bun, and her hands were folded tightly on the table, knuckles white, like she was bracing herself for an impact. She didn't look up as I approached. I hesitated, then sat. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was loaded, like a pressure cooker right before the steam escapes. I opened my mouth to speak, but she beat me to it. "Did you love him?" It wasn't a trap. There was no venom in her voice, just exhaustion, like she was too tired to play games anymore. I blinked. "Yes," I said softly. "I did." She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Then she looked up, and in her eyes I saw something unexpected, not rage, not bitterness, just grief. "He told me you were a girlfriend," she said, "from before we got married. One of many. I asked once if you two ever reconnected." He laughed, said not to worry. She sipped her coffee. Her hands shook slightly. "He lied to both of us." I couldn't speak. "For 25 years, I scheduled our lives around his travel," she continued. "Birthdays, anniversaries, school plays. He was always on a business trip. I watched my kids wait by the window every June, thinking he'd come home early. He never did." I swallowed hard. "You know what hurts the most?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not the money, not the house, not even that you didn't know about us. It's that all this time, I thought I was the only one being tolerated. But we were both kept." The word sat between us like a bruise. "Kept." I nodded slowly. "I used to imagine growing old with him," I said quietly. "Sitting on the porch together, watching the seasons change. I thought we had time." Elaine let out a bitter laugh. "Time. That man divided time like a banker counting bills. Precise, cold, efficient." Then she looked at me, eyes narrowing. "If you had known about me, about us, would you have left him?" I hesitated. "I want to say yes," I whispered. "But 27 years is a lot of memories, a lot of holidays, a lot of stories I told myself to sleep better at night." She nodded again, slowly, as if she understood all too well. We sat in silence, not the kind that begged to be filled, the kind that acknowledged pain and gave it room to breathe. Eventually, she reached into her purse and pulled out a worn envelope. "He left this in our safe," she said, "a copy of his original will, before he changed it." She slid it across the table. I hesitated, opened it. Her name was the only one on it. I stared at the paper, the weight of it sinking into my bones. "I didn't ask for any of this," I said. "I still don't know what to do with it." Elaine looked at me, and this time her eyes softened just a fraction. "Neither do I." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We didn't walk out of that cafe as friends, but we walked out with something. Not closure, not forgiveness, just understanding. And in that moment, it was enough. I didn't expect us to talk again. That meeting with Elaine had left me emotionally winded, like I'd run a mile through fog. But it also cleared a corner of the air. Just one. And sometimes, one breath of clarity is enough to keep you going. For a few days afterward, I went through the motions. I watered my plants, took Oliver, my scrappy rescue mutt, on long walks around the edges of Montpelier, where the houses thinned and the trees stood like quiet, forgiving witnesses. I even read a book cover to cover, something I hadn't done in weeks. But inside, something kept replaying. We were both kept. That word. It stuck to my ribs like old soup. I started journaling again, just a little each night, mostly fragments, sentences that trailed off, pages filled with why in looping angry cursive. But it helped. It helped in the way sweeping a floor does. You don't notice how much dirt has collected until you see it piled up. Then one morning, an envelope arrived. No return address. The handwriting on the front wasn't Elaine's. It was neat, almost too neat. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of a second will, one I hadn't seen before. Stephen had signed it 5 months before his death. Same notary, same signatures, different wording. It wasn't just a revision. It was a full replacement. The first page started like this. To the woman who stood beside me when I was too much of a coward to face the truth. This is not a reward, it's an apology. My hands went cold. His handwriting, his voice, his cowardice dressed in sentiment. That will left everything to me, yes, but now with a note. And that note changed everything. Because for the first time, I saw proof that Stephen knew what he was doing. He knew he was dying. He knew what this would do to Elaine, to Noah, to Rachel. And he did it anyway. I sat there at the kitchen table with Oliver curled at my feet, staring at the page like it might explode. My phone buzzed. A text. Elaine, I found a box. Photos, letters, old cards. From your years. Do you want them? I replied, before I even thought about it. Yes, please. We met at the same cafe. Again, same chairs, same smell of cinnamon and caution. This time her eyes didn't hold exhaustion. They held something else. Resignation, maybe. Or that dull calm that settles in after a storm has passed. She slid the box across the table. I didn't read them, she said. Didn't want to. I opened the lid. There they were. Birthday cards, plane tickets, a menu from our favorite Italian place in Connecticut with a heart drawn next to the lasagna. A life. Mine. Stored in a cardboard box in a stranger's house. Did he ever write you letters? I asked her quietly. Only early on, she said. After the kids came, it was all texts and business trips. I pulled one envelope from the stack. It was addressed in Stephen's handwriting. No stamp. He must have left it with her thinking she'd pass it on someday. Inside was a single sentence. Forgive me if you ever can. Elaine read over my shoulder, her lips pressed tight. She didn't comment. Didn't have to. Forgiveness isn't something you give because someone asks for it. It's something you offer when you're ready to stop bleeding. She stood up first. I followed. We didn't say goodbye. That felt too final. But just as I turned to leave, she said, You ever wonder how many lives he was living? I paused. All the time. She nodded. Me too. That night, I spread the contents of the box across my living room floor. Oliver sniffed one of the envelopes, then curled up nearby, sensing that this wasn't a night for fetch. As I read each letter, each receipt, each note scrawled on hotel stationery, I began to piece together the man I had loved, or at least tried to. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't even a mastermind. Stephen Alden was just a man who didn't know how to make a choice, so he made none. And in doing so, he destroyed both lives he'd tried to keep. Elaine's wisdom echoed in my head. We were both kept, and yet, somehow we had also kept each other going. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere in those pages, I stopped crying for him. I started grieving for me, for Elaine, for all the years spent loving a version of a man who never truly existed in full. It wasn't pretty. Grief never is. But it was honest, and in a world of half-truths, that felt like the first step toward something real. The days after receiving that box of memories felt quieter. Not in a peaceful way, but in that heavy sort of quiet, like the air before a snowstorm, where everything is still waiting. I kept the box in the corner of my living room beside Oliver's bed. He'd glance at it, sometimes sniff once, then ignore it completely. Smart dog. I wasn't ignoring it, though. Every evening, I found myself drawn back to its contents. I'd reread notes, receipts, postcards. One from Boston had a little doodle of a crab and the words, too cold for romance, too warm to regret it. What did that even mean? I laughed because sometimes absurdity is the only thing keeping the grief from eating you alive. Then came the call from my lawyer. Josie, he said, voice tight, you may want to come in. When I arrived, he handed me a thick envelope heavier than anything I'd held since the will. Inside was a letter from the estate executor, a final audit of Stephen's financials. I expected more properties, more bank account numbers. What I didn't expect was the apartment in Manhattan. It wasn't listed in the original estate documents. I stared at the address, heart racing. He had a place in New York. My lawyer nodded. Looks like it. Paid in full. Bought under a holding company. Why didn't this come up before? Because he used a different name, a pseudonym, but the tax ID matches. I leaned back, breath catching in my throat. Did Elaine know? No. We just informed her. It hit me then. The lies weren't just limited to 2 women in 2 towns. They stretched even farther, threads of deceit tangled into cities I hadn't even considered. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I Googled the address. It was in the East Village. Modest building, 5th floor, no elevator. I wondered if Stephen had ever climbed those stairs thinking about me or about Elaine. The next morning, I called Elaine. "Did you know I asked before she could even say hello?" "No," she said softly, "but I'm not surprised anymore." We decided to go together. I don't know what compelled us: curiosity, anger, masochism. Probably a cocktail of all three. We took the train down two middle-aged women sharing silence like a threadbare blanket. On the cab ride to the address, Elaine finally spoke. "I used to think if I just loved him enough, he'd stay more." I looked out the window. I used to think he hated travel. We both let out a short, sharp laugh. Then the silence returned. The building was old, the kind of New York walk-up that smelled like history and mildew. The super met us out front. He was wiry, wore a Yankees cap, and clearly had no idea what storm he was about to invite inside. "Been empty a while," he said, unlocking the door. "Nice guy, though. Quiet, kept to himself, paid on time." He paused. "Didn't know he was married." "Twice," I muttered. Elaine elbowed me gently, not in anger, just acknowledgement. We stepped inside. The apartment was fully furnished, tastefully, simply. No clutter, no mess. A life paused mid-sentence. A blue mug on the counter, a wool coat hanging by the door. Books lined up on the shelf, mostly non-fiction war history, a few novels with cracked spines. There were pictures, too. Framed photos on the windowsill. None of me, none of Elaine, just Stephen, alone, on a boat, at a museum, smiling beside people we didn't know. Elaine stood by the window, hands folded in front of her. So this was the third life, she said. The one without either of us. It wasn't a betrayal in the traditional sense. There was no mistress waiting to meet us. No hidden child playing with toys on the floor. Just solitude. Just proof that the man we loved had needed escape so badly, he'd built an entire sanctuary without us. And somehow, that hurt the most. I walked into the bedroom. The bed was made. The closet was half empty. On the dresser was a photo I didn't expect to see: Stephen with a dog, not Oliver. Some shaggy terrier-looking thing. The photo had a crease through the middle, like it had been folded and smoothed out again. Underneath it, a letter addressed to whoever finds this. Elaine joined me. We opened it together. "I don't know what will happen after I'm gone. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect understanding. I was weak. I was afraid of being seen fully, so I lived in parts. I loved you both. That's the hardest part to explain. This place, it was where I could breathe, where I wasn't lying because I was alone." I folded the letter and placed it back. Elaine was crying quietly. I didn't touch her. We'd learned not to reach for each other's pain. It wasn't the kind you could ease with a hug. Instead, I sat on the bed and whispered, "Maybe he really didn't know how to choose." Elaine nodded. Or maybe he thought not choosing was kinder. We left the apartment without taking anything. The super asked if we wanted to clean it out or keep it. We both shook our heads. "Donate it," I said. "All of it." Elaine looked at me. He didn't take it with him. Neither will we. On the train ride back, we didn't speak much. Just shared sips of bad coffee and occasional glances that said, "Can you believe any of this?" And in my mind, I kept returning to that photograph on the dresser. A man, a dog, a sliver of peace we were never invited into. I didn't feel jealous. Not really. I just felt tired, but also just slightly free, because now the last door had been opened. And finally, I could close it. When I got home that night, the house greeted me with that familiar, too still quiet. Oliver wagged his tail, slowly sensing my exhaustion, but offering the small kindness of his presence. I sat on the floor beside him, ran my fingers along his ears, and whispered, "We're done, buddy." That was the last door, but the quiet didn't last long. The next morning, I stepped outside to find the word "liar" scrawled in red spray paint across my garage door. All caps, all fury, and all too real. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there in my robe, the Vermont air cold on my ankles, staring at the word like it had appeared in fire. And here's the ridiculous part. My first thought wasn't, "Who did this?" It was, "Do I deserve this?" Because shame is sticky like that. It doesn't matter how innocent you are if enough people point fingers, eventually you start to see a mirror in their hands. A neighbor passed by, eyes wide. She slowed down, mouth open, like she was about to say something, then thought better of it. I gave her a little wave anyway. Later that day, another neighbor, Marge, 2 houses down, offered to help me repaint the door. I declined. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because some stubborn part of me wanted the world to see what grief looked like after it's been soaked in gasoline and lit by someone else's match. I left it there for 3 days. On the 4th, I woke up, made coffee, stared at it through the kitchen window, and said aloud, "Enough." I bought white paint. I covered every last letter. And for the first time in weeks, I looked in the mirror and didn't flinch. That same day, I made a decision. I would not keep playing the villain in a story someone else wrote. So I started giving money away. Not publicly. Not to silence guilt, but to cut the poison from my veins. Quiet donations, food pantries, women's shelters, mental health programs for widows, a library renovation in a neighboring town. I didn't put my name on anything. But of course, word got out. Helena's daughter, Amanda, posted court screenshots online. "She's trying to buy forgiveness," one post read. Another said, "Blood money doesn't grow flowers." Then came the lawsuit, filed by Amanda and her brother Luke, contesting the will, accusing me of manipulation, coercion, and, you guessed it, being a predator to a dying man. I read the legal notice at the same kitchen table where Stephen used to butter toast and complain about politics. "You have got to be kidding me," I whispered, but no one laughed. I called my lawyer, who calmly explained their case is weak. "We have documentation, medical records, witness signatures. Everything Stephen signed was sound." Still, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I kept the curtains closed, worried every movement might end up in another angry post or tabloid whisper. Then one morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door. No return address, no stamp. Inside was a photo of me outside the post office. A red marker scrawl across the top read, "How's the blood money, Josie?" I dropped it, rushed to the sink, and vomited until my knees gave out. Not because I feared for my life, but because I feared they were right. I called my lawyer again. "I want to settle," I said. "You don't need to," he replied. "I know, but I want to." That afternoon, I picked up the phone and called Elaine. "I'm done," I told her. "I want to split the estate." Her voice was quiet. "I've seen what they're doing. I didn't know about the photo. I don't care about the money anymore," I said. "I care about peace." There was a pause. Then she said, "Meet me tomorrow." We met again at the same cafe. This time, Elaine looked different. Not lighter, but less brittle. "I want to say I'm sorry," she said as soon as we sat. "For everything my kids have done. For what I let myself believe about you." I didn't know what to say, so I said what I meant. "They're hurting," I whispered. "So was I." We talked for over an hour. About motherhood, about identity, about grief, and the strange ways it shifts our shadows. Then we reached an agreement. A private, legally binding settlement. A portion of the inheritance would go into a trust for Amanda and Luke's children. Another part would be donated to a nonprofit in Stephen's name, one that helped veterans find housing. The rest, mine, to do with as I pleased. We walked out of the cafe side by side. Not friends, not exactly allies, but something in between. When I got home that evening, I stood in my living room, bathed in the soft light of dusk, and realized something strange. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It didn't echo with Stephen's secrets or Amanda's accusations or my own self-doubt. It just felt like a house, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like it was mine. I knew there would be more gossip, more posts, more sideways glances at the grocery store. But there would also be mornings, dog walks, hot coffee, and now maybe peace. I wasn't looking for redemption anymore. I was just looking forward. I didn't tell anyone I was moving. Not the lawyer, not my neighbors, not even Elaine. It wasn't secrecy, it was sanctuary. I needed the quiet. I needed the break. When you become the headline, the whispered name at the hair salon, the punchline in someone else's morality play, you realize the only way to begin again is to vanish a little first. So I packed slowly, carefully. I kept what mattered, my mother's tea set, the books that still smelled like second-hand bookstores, a stack of letters Stephen had written me over the years, now tainted, but still part of the mosaic of my life. I left behind all of Stephen's things. Not out of spite, but because they weren't mine anymore. They belonged to a past version of me that I no longer recognized. And with a for sale sign in the yard and a realtor who thankfully didn't ask questions, I moved 2 towns over into a modest white cottage with navy shutters and a wraparound porch that squeaked when the wind hit it just right. It had a small garden, a maple tree in the front yard, and neighbors who only waved, they didn't stare. No one here called me a mistress or a thief. They just called me Miss Josie. Oliver adapted faster than I did. He found his favorite sunny spot in the living room within hours, curled up with a grunt of approval, and looked at me like, "Okay, this'll do." And for once I agreed. The first morning I made tea and sat on the porch, wrapped in a flannel blanket, watching the town come alive. Children riding bikes. A man walking his corgi in a raincoat. The dog not the man. Someone practicing saxophone off-key across the street. I didn't check social media. I didn't look at the news. I just breathed. And it felt like the first breath in months. I started volunteering at the local library. Not for redemption, but for rhythm. The director, Ruth, was in her 60s with wild gray curls and a voice like a radio host from the 70s. She didn't ask questions when I introduced myself, just handed me a cart full of returned books and said, "Think you can handle alphabetizing?" I almost cried right there. On Saturdays, I took over story time. The kids called me Miss Josie. They fought over who got to sit closest to Oliver, who had become an unofficial library dog complete with his own bandana that read, "Reading is Possum." I started planting herbs in the garden. Basil, thyme, lavender, my mother's favorites. Sometimes I'd hum while watering them. Sometimes I'd cry. Healing is funny like that. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It sneaks in quietly when you're elbow deep in rosemary or laughing at a child's terrible knock-knock joke. One day Helena showed up. She'd heard through Ruth because apparently small towns run on whisper networks that I'd moved, that I was okay. She brought cookies from a bakery in her town. "They're not homemade," she said, "but they're warm. That counts." We sat on the porch, drank tea, watched Oliver chase a squirrel and lose. We didn't talk about Stephen. We talked about books, about gardening, about the latest town debate over whether the stop sign near Main Street needed a flashing light. Light sarcasm, shared sighs, small talk that somehow meant everything. Her visits became monthly, then more frequent. Then one day she brought her grandchildren. I hadn't expected that. The girl was 6, all freckles and questions. The boy, 4, clung to her leg like a barnacle. They were cautious. I was petrified. But Oliver's sweet miracle that he is waltzed right up, flopped over for belly rubs, and did what adults hadn't managed in months, bridged the space between us. By the end of the afternoon, the kids were calling me Miss Josie too. They colored on my porch with sidewalk chalk. The girl drew a crooked heart and wrote, "You are nice" under it. I nearly lost it. I didn't ask for this. I didn't expect it. But here, it was kindness offered freely by tiny hands that didn't care about headlines or inheritance lawsuits. Just juice boxes and Oliver's wagging tail. Helena's daughter, Amanda, stayed in the car that day. But a few weeks later, she joined. She was reserved, guarded, but not cruel. "Are you really Miss Josie from the library?" she asked once, hands in her jacket pockets. "I am," I said quietly. She nodded. "They like your story time?" That was it. That was enough. She didn't bring up Stephen. Neither did I. But the past doesn't always need to be spoken to be felt. It hangs there like mist, soft damp, impossible to ignore. Still, there was something in Amanda's face that day. Not acceptance, but maybe permission. Permission to be something other than the villain. That night after they left, I sat on my porch, Oliver's head resting on my foot, and realized I wasn't healing alone anymore. I hadn't been to Montpelier since the move. Something about returning felt like inviting the storm back in. But I knew the past doesn't just stay where you leave it. Sometimes it knocks. And one morning it did. An envelope. No stamp, no address. Just like the one from before. It was sitting on my front step, curled slightly at the edges from the dew. Oliver barked at it like it had teeth. I picked it up slowly, feeling that familiar rise of anxiety. Tight chest, shaky hands, breath too shallow. Inside, photocopies, court filings, screenshots from some online message board, and scrawled across the top in red ink. "You thought this was over?" I didn't need a signature. It was Noah. Helena's son had never forgiven me, not for the money, not for the settlement, not for existing. He'd refused the peace his mother had chosen. Said she'd betrayed their father's memory by making amends with me. And apparently he hadn't stopped digging. I called my lawyer. He sighed the moment I told him. Nothing in that envelope is new, he said gently. He's reaching. But still the old panic settled in like it never left. Like a spider in the corner of the ceiling, always there, always waiting. That Monday, a local paper ran a small blurb, "New filings in the Alden estate drama." It didn't name me. It didn't need to. I stayed inside for days. Oliver wouldn't leave my side. He even slept curled up beside me on the bed, one paw on my ankle, like he was grounding me to the earth. Then the phone rang. "Helena," I heard she said. I didn't reply. "He's not well, Josie," she continued. "He's drowning in something none of us can fix. He's trying to destroy me." "No," she said softly. "He's trying to punish someone, anyone, and I won't let him do it in my name." 2 days later, she showed up at my door. Hair pulled back, coat too thin for the cold. But she was there. "I called the Attorney General's office," she said. "I filed a statement." My throat tightened. "A statement? In your defense." She pulled out a folded letter. It said what no headline ever would, that I had not manipulated Stephen, that he had made his decisions sound of mind, and that the true betrayal had been his, not mine. Then came the hearing. Not a trial, just a review. A judge would decide whether Noah's new evidence warranted reopening the estate. I wore black slacks and a sweater that used to be Stephen's favorite, once soft, now itchy. A reminder of how even comfort turns sharp when paired with memory. Helena sat beside me in the courthouse. Our lawyers spoke. The judge read in silence, flipping pages with tired fingers. It took less than 30 minutes. No grounds. Case dismissed. I didn't breathe until we were outside. Reporters waited, of course, hungry-eyed and eager. I froze, but Helena stepped forward. "She is not the villain," she said, voice clear. "She is another victim of the same man who deceived us all. My son needs help, and Josie deserves peace." That night I cried. Not the gasping sobs from those early days, but a quiet, aching release. The kind that drains out slow and steady, like a faucet you forget is running. The next day, I met Helena at the park. Her granddaughter was there laughing on the swings. We sat on a bench, coffees in hand, letting the wind say more than we needed to. "You know," she said, "eventually I used to think you stole my life. I never meant to." "I know that now," we said in silence. Then she smiled. "Amanda told me the kids want to invite you to the school book fair. They think Miss Josie picks the best stories." I laughed through my tears. Imagine that being invited wanted seen for something that had nothing to do with the past. Something that felt like future. As we sat there, two women shaped by the same storm, I realized I no longer flinched at the sound of Stephen's name. I didn't carry it like a wound. I carried it like a scar. Faded. Healed. And that afternoon, as Oliver chased leaves and Helena's granddaughter waved at me from the slide, I thought, this isn't the life I planned, but maybe it's the one I earned. There was something strange about waking up in a home where no one expected anything from you. No hushed conversations behind closed doors. No side glances or whispers under breath. No pity, no suspicion. No, just silence. Not the kind that presses down on your chest, but the kind that breathes with you. I started each morning with a cup of tea, Oliver curled at my feet, and the soft hush of sprinklers echoing across the neighborhood. Birds flitted around the maple tree out front like they were old friends who didn't mind that I was still learning how to belong here. Montpelier was still close enough to drive to, but emotionally, it felt like another planet. Most days I didn't think about Stephen, or Elaine, or even the money. I alphabetized books at the library, helped kids pick out chapter books with dragons and talking foxes, and sat cross-legged in the reading room every Saturday morning. Miss Josie, they'd call. Read the one with the pirate who's scared of jellyfish. I always said yes. It was the kind of joy that didn't need grand gestures. Just voices, laughter, and the feeling of little hands tugging at my sleeves because they believed I had magic in my voice. Maybe I did. One Saturday, Elaine stopped by. It had become a quiet tradition. She'd bring bakery cookies, and I'd make 2 strong tea, and we'd sit on the porch and talk about everything except Stephen. That day she brought her grandkids. At first, they were shy. I didn't blame them. I was still in some small way the shadow behind their grief. But then Oliver trotted up, tail-wagging tongue flopping out the side of his mouth like a golden goofball. The little girl giggled. "He has silly ears." "He does," I agreed, "and he snores louder than a lawnmower." The boy knelt beside him, stroking his back with quiet wonder. By the time Elaine and I sat down with tea, they were playing fetch in the yard. Just like that, no heavy introductions, no long explanations. Kids are like that. They don't need your resume, just your presence. Elaine's daughter Amanda hovered near the gate. She looked different than the last time I saw her, less guarded, more curious. Her eyes flicked toward me as she said, "They call you Miss Josie at the library." I nodded. "They do." "They like you," she said, almost like it surprised her. "They're good kids." That was it. No dramatics, no accusations. But it was something. We sat outside until the sun dipped behind the rooftops, painting the sky in quiet pinks and oranges. Elaine left with her arms full of cookie tins and coloring pages the kids insisted on showing me. As I closed the door behind them, I realized the silence had changed again. It wasn't just peaceful. It was full of possibility. The next day at the library, a little boy I'd never met before ran up to me. "My cousin says you're a pirate," he shouted with glee. "Only on weekends," I whispered, tapping the side of my nose. "Don't tell the mayor." He laughed so hard he fell over backward. And there on that brightly carpeted floor, with books stacked like little castles and crayons scattered like confetti, I realized I was no longer just the woman who survived Stephen Alden's betrayal. I was Miss Josie, the woman who read books, who adopted a mutt with crooked ears, who had wind chimes on the porch and daisies blooming in the backyard, who had children's voices echoing in her ears instead of accusations. I still got mail from Montpelier. Still saw the occasional article, some old reporter trying to reignite a story that had finally cooled to embers. But I didn't open them. Didn't even think to. They weren't part of this life. This life wasn't glamorous. No estates or headlines. No scandals or whispered rumors. Just me, a dog, a stack of children's books, and the kind of days that felt like soft cloth against sun-warmed skin. Elaine still visited, sometimes with Amanda, sometimes with the kids. Once she brought a photo album. "I thought you might want to see him through our eyes," she said. We looked at pictures of Stephen at school plays in Halloween costumes, teaching Noah how to ride a bike. I expected pain, but mostly I felt distance, not detachment, just closure. I chose one photo. Just one. Stephen holding a baby girl, Amanda probably on his shoulders, both of them laughing like the world hadn't yet cracked. I put it in a frame, not in the living room, in the back hallway, where I pass it but don't linger. A reminder, not of him, but of what truth costs and how much healing is worth. There's something no one tells you about healing. It's not a straight line. It's more like a gravel road, bumpy, unpredictable, sometimes beautiful, and sometimes it just hurts like stepping on a Lego barefoot. It was a crisp Saturday morning when it happened. I had just returned from the farmer's market, arms full of beets and local honey, Oliver trotting proudly beside me like he'd just won a prize for best tail wag. The leaves on the maple tree in my front yard had started to turn a mosaic of amber and rust, and the world smelled like cinnamon and earth. And then I saw it, an envelope. No handwriting, no return address, just like the last one. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it lying there on the doormat like a trap set with bait I didn't want. The last time I opened something like that, I ended up retching over my sink, my whole body shaking. And while I wasn't that woman anymore, the memory still lived in my bones. Still, I picked it up. Inside, printed documents, photocopies, screenshots from online forums, snippets of Stephen's old emails, and scrawled in bold red marker across the top, "You thought we were done." I didn't need to guess who sent it. Noah. Elaine had warned me he wasn't well. That the settlement hadn't softened him, only made him angrier. I'd heard through Ruth, the library director and local gossip sponge, that he was reaching out to lawyers again, digging through archives, trying to prove Stephen had been coerced, trying to turn back time with paperwork. I called my lawyer. Again. He sighed before I even spoke. "We're aware of it," he said. "Nothing actionable, just noise." But it didn't feel like noise. It felt like a ghost with a megaphone. By Monday, the whispers reached the local news. Just a blurb, new allegations surface in Alden estate controversy. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't read. I didn't even sit on the porch. I curled up on the couch with Oliver pressed tightly to my side, and I stayed there until the morning light crept across the room, like a hesitant guest. When Elaine called, I was still in the same spot. "I heard," she said gently. I didn't respond. I told her, "You shouldn't. He's lost and angry. But this isn't your burden." "I don't want to go through it again," I whispered. "You won't," she said. And I wanted to believe her. 2 days later, Elaine showed up at my door. She was holding a manila envelope and wearing the determined expression of someone who just cleaned out a closet and found all the skeletons. "I filed a statement with the Attorney General's office," she said before I even offered tea. I blinked. "You did what?" "I defended you," she said simply. "Legally, publicly, on record." Stephen was of sound mind. "You did not manipulate him. I have the doctor's letters. I have the dates. He chose you, and I am not going to let my son rewrite that." I stared at her, unable to speak. Then I cried, not because I was scared, but because, for the first time, someone was standing up for me, without hesitation, without waiting to see which way the wind blew. When the court hearing came to determine if Noah's petition to reopen the case would even be accepted, I walked into that room with Elaine at my side. Not behind me, not across the aisle. Beside me. The hearing was quick. The judge barely looked up from the files. "No grounds," she said. "Motion denied. Case dismissed." 30 minutes later, it was over. Outside, a few local reporters circled like flies. Microphones were shoved toward us. I stayed quiet. Elaine didn't. "She is not the villain," she said clearly, her voice unwavering. "She is another victim of the same man who deceived us both. My son needs healing, but Margaret Josie deserves peace." They got their quote. I got my breath back. Later that week, we sat under the same oak tree in the town park. Her granddaughter played on the swings while Elaine handed me a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. "You know," she said, unwrapping her own, "I used to think you were the woman who stole my husband." I looked down, bracing myself. But now she continued, "I know we were just two women, trying to survive the same storm. We just had different windows. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to." I leaned back, let the sun warm my face, and thought about what it meant to be believed, to be defended, to no longer be someone's secret or someone's shame. Healing, I realized, isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about remembering who you are underneath it. And slowly, I was remembering. Spring crept into Montpellier like a sigh of relief. The snow receded gently, as if asking permission to leave, and green returned to the trees in soft, cautious whispers. For the first time in a long time, the season didn't feel like a lie. It felt like something honest, something earned. I found a rhythm again. Monday and Friday mornings, I volunteered at the library, mostly in the children's section. I became Miss Josie to a dozen sticky-handed toddlers who couldn't pronounce my full name. I read about dragons and talking raccoons and brave little girls with stars in their pockets. Sometimes one of them would fall asleep during story time, head on my knee, warm breath on my arm, and in those moments, I'd forget all the headlines and all the courtrooms. I started helping Ruth with cataloging too. At first, she insisted I didn't have to. You're here to breathe, not to alphabetize. But there's something healing about putting things in order. Spine by spine. Letter by letter. Chaos turning into calm. Honestly, the Dewey Decimal System deserves more respect. It's more soothing than most meditation apps. Oliver, my sweet mutt with his floppy ear and eyebrows like punctuation marks, became a local celebrity. He'd sit outside the library door, tail wagging, occasionally howling if I took too long. Kids loved him, so did adults. Some came just to pet him, not even to check out books. It was the first time I'd been part of something that felt light and easy. But that didn't mean everything stayed quiet. I still got mail. Every couple of weeks, some stranger from another state would send a letter. Some supportive, some not. One envelope had nothing inside but a single printed line. "You should be ashamed. No return address." I didn't cry. I didn't rip it up. I folded it once neatly and dropped it in the recycling bin. I didn't have time for shame anymore. Shame was heavy, and I had groceries to carry and children's books to reshelve and a dog who needed exactly 2 treats before every walk, or he'd protest by sitting dramatically in the driveway. One day Elaine called. "I made a pie," she said, a little breathless. "It's terrible. Come help me eat it." I laughed. "On my way." She was waiting on the porch with 2 mismatched mugs and a pie that frankly looked like a crime scene. But we ate it anyway. We talked about books, whether her new porch swing the mole that kept digging up her tulips. We didn't talk about Stephen. Not much anymore. Grief is strange. It doesn't disappear. It just moves into a spare room and learns to keep quiet. "I saw Rachel," she said softly one afternoon as we were weeding her garden. My hand stilled in the soil. "She brought the kids over. We had lunch. It was awkward, but it wasn't angry." I smiled, a little surprised. "That's good. She asked about you." That froze me. "What did you say?" Elaine shrugged. "I said you're kind and patient and stubborn as hell." I let out a laugh that sounded more like a hiccup. "Fair. She's trying," Elaine added. "It's not perfect, but it's something." That night, I sat on my porch, wrapped in a blanket, Oliver curled at my feet. It hit me not as a thunderclap, but as a soft truth that settled in my chest. I was no longer just surviving. I was living. The ache hadn't vanished, but it had shrunk. It no longer filled rooms. It just lingered at the edges like an old scar, and I'd learned how to carry it without bleeding. There's this debate people always have online. Do people change, or do they just reveal who they've always been? I don't know the answer, but I know who I used to be. A woman who believed love was enough. A woman who built her life around a man who wore masks like accessories. And now I was a woman who found joy in returned library books, who laughed with children, who shared awkward pies on porches, who chose silence over spectacle, truth over performance. And I liked her. I liked me, even with the cracks, especially with the cracks, because that's where the light came in. It was a quiet Tuesday when the card arrived. A simple envelope hand-addressed in soft curving script. The return address was Elaine's. No fancy calligraphy, no shiny stickers, just neat handwriting and a little smudge in the corner, like someone had hesitated while sealing it. I opened it on the porch, with Oliver's chin resting on my foot, the air warm and heavy, with the smell of lilacs blooming nearby. Inside was a card white with gold trim, and a message that made my breath catch in my throat. Christmas Eve. Dinner at my place. Bring Oliver. No pressure, but we'd love to have you. Elaine. I read it 3 times. Then again out loud, as if that would help it sink in. A year ago, I had stood in the same town at a funeral feeling like the ghost no one had invited. Now I was being asked to join the family table. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it. I let it breathe. I wasn't afraid she didn't mean it. I was afraid she did. Afraid that walking through her door would make everything real, that I truly wasn't the villain anymore, that maybe I never had been. And sometimes that kind of grace is scarier than any insult. But I said yes. That night, I called Elaine and told her I'd be there. "You sure?" she asked. "I'm sure," I replied, and for once, I didn't second guess it. When Christmas Eve came, Montpellier was covered in a fresh layer of snow, like the town had dressed up in lace for the occasion. The roads were slick but calm, and everything smelled like chimney smoke and fir trees. Oliver wore his red bandana. He looked dignified, like a small dog ambassador attending a peace summit. Elaine met me at the door, cheeks pink from the cold sweater red like holly berries. "Merry Christmas," she said, then pulled me into a hug. Not the awkward kind. Not the half-hearted tap on the back kind. A real hug. One that said, "I see you. I'm glad you're here." Inside the house was full of warmth and noise. Soft music played on the radio. Pine-scented candles flickered in corners. Her grandchildren were sprawled on the living room floor with puzzles and plastic dinosaurs. Rachel was by the fireplace pouring cider. She looked up when I walked in. We held each other's eyes for a beat too long. Then she gave me a nod. Not a smile, but not a glare. Just a quiet offering. A ceasefire. That was enough. Dinner was simple and perfect. Roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing roasted carrots with brown sugar. Elaine had baked 2 pies, apple and pumpkin, and warned everyone that one of them might be overcooked because someone got distracted trying to wrap presents while the timer was still on. Laughter rippled around the table. And me, I sat between Elaine's granddaughter and a chair reserved for Oliver, who sat patiently with a small napkin tied around his neck like a proper gentleman. At one point, the little boy turned to me and asked, "Are you really Miss Josie from the library?" I laughed. "That's me." "My teacher says you do the best voices," he added proudly. I glanced at Rachel. She met my eyes again, and this time she smiled. Later, after the dishes were done and the kids were building a Lego fortress near the tree, Elaine sat beside me on the couch with a glass of wine. "You know," she said, staring into the lights last year, "I thought this night would never happen. I thought I'd never be able to look at you without wanting to scream." I didn't say anything. I just waited. But now she continued, "When I see you, I see someone who survived. Someone who got handed a pile of grief and found a way to shape it into something softer." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I never tried to take your place," I whispered. "I didn't even know I had one to take." "I know," she said. "Now I do." We didn't talk more after that. We didn't need to. When it was time to go, Elaine's granddaughter came running up to me with a card clutched in her mittened hands. It had stick figures drawn in bold marker, one with gray hair and a big smile, the other with floppy ears. It read, "To Tia Josie, Merry Christmas." Tia, Aunt. I stood in the doorway with tears prickling the backs of my eyes, the card against my chest, like a fragile gift I didn't want to bend. And I realized something simple and enormous all at once. I wasn't outside anymore. I was inside. Not just the house, but the story. A part of something. And not because of Stephen. Not because of money. But because I had stayed when it was hard, apologized when it wasn't required, and offered grace even when I didn't always receive it. I drove home slowly that night. Snow fell in gentle waves. The world felt hushed and holy. And for the first time in years, I believed this truth in my bones. I had been erased once, but this time I'd written myself back in. Spring tiptoed into Montpelier like someone unsure they were welcome. The snow melted slowly, revealing stubborn patches of grass and hopeful little shoots pushing through the soil. My maple tree in the front yard bloomed again, green this time, soft and fluttering, and the birds returned like they had missed our street specifically. And maybe they had. Oliver and I resumed our morning walks, winding through the familiar trails where tree branches still creaked and squirrels chattered like local gossipers. People waved, now neighbors, library patrons, even the lady from the corner bakery who once avoided eye contact now offered me leftover croissants wrapped in parchment. Not everyone had forgotten. Some still remembered the scandal, the whispers, the funeral that had cracked open 2 lives. But the story had softened. A year had passed, and the world had other things to talk about. I was no longer the mistress or the thief. I was just Miss Josie, the woman with the dog, and the garden gloves, and a fondness for lemon tea. But healing wasn't a straight line. Sometimes I'd be shelving books at the library and catch sight of a familiar spine, Stephen's favorite author, and I'd freeze, heart thudding. Or I'd see an old email tucked away in a digital folder I hadn't touched in months. Or I'd hear someone at the grocery store say Alden and feel my stomach drop like a stone. Grief. I'd learned doesn't respect calendars. It arrives late, leaves early circles back when you least expect it. But I'd also learned that joy can do the same. One afternoon, I was sitting on my porch with Elaine. We didn't talk much these days, not out of discomfort, but because we didn't need to. The silence between us had matured into something sacred. We'd earned it. She sipped her tea, her knees covered by a blanket I had knit over the winter. "You know," she said, "sometimes I dream of him, but he's younger, smiling, whole." I nodded. "I dream of him too, but I always wake up angry." "That's fair," she said with a chuckle. Anger kept me warm for a long time. "I think mine just wore out," I said. It got tired of not being answered. She looked at me with that sad, fond look she often wore these days. You could have disappeared, after everything. But you stayed. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. No, she said gently. You stayed because you had something to build. Her words landed like sunlight on old wood, soft but warm enough to stay with me long after. A few weeks later, her daughter stopped by. Not for long. Just a quick hello, a basket of muffins, a quiet smile. Her kids ran straight to Oliver, calling him Captain Floppy because of his lopsided ear. I laughed so hard I almost dropped my tea. Healing, I realized, had its own language. Sometimes it spoke through children. Sometimes through baked goods. Sometimes it was just someone saying your name without bitterness. There were still letters. Reporters who wanted to revisit the story. Strangers who sent passive-aggressive prayer cards in the mail. Once, someone left an anonymous note on my windshield that simply said, "Still watching." I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I just took Oliver for a walk and picked up tulips on the way home. If they wanted me to break, they'd missed their chance. That version of me, fragile, flinching, raw, had been buried beside Stephen. In her place stood someone who had weathered a storm and now chose what kind of wind she let in. The library continued to be my haven. Every Friday afternoon, I read to the kids, some of them regulars now. They brought me drawings, notes, even a bracelet made of yarn that I wore like it was Tiffany's. To them, I wasn't anyone's scandal. I was the lady who made the stories come alive, who let them howl during pirate scenes and whisper during lullabies. Elaine and I began hosting small dinners. Nothing fancy. Soup, bread, maybe a pie. Sometimes it was just us. Sometimes Ruth from the library came. Sometimes Rachel brought the kids and sat quietly while I taught them how to make paper flowers. One night, after the others had left, Elaine lingered on the porch. "You know what I wish," she said, staring out at the maple tree now golden with dusk. "What?" "That we'd met before him." I smiled softly. "We wouldn't have liked each other. Maybe not at first," she admitted, "but I think we would have figured it out." "I'm glad we figured it out anyway," I said. She nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, not really. It was just not wanting to stay bitter. "I'll take that," I said, "because sometimes you don't get to erase the pain. You just get to stop feeding it." A few weeks later, I found another envelope on my porch. No threats, no insults. Just a return address. I recognized Noah. Inside was a card. "Miss Josie, I was wrong. Thank you for taking care of my mother." And no poetry, no excuses, just truth, plain and heavy and healing. I sat down on the porch steps with Oliver pressed against my leg and cried. Not the shattering kind. The quiet kind. The kind that says, "You made it." And I had. I wasn't whole. I wasn't perfect. But I was here. And this life, this modest cottage, this lopsided dog, this slow healing, it was mine. So here we are. If you're still with me, eyes soft, maybe curled up in a blanket, maybe listening in the dark, I want to thank you. Not just for hearing my story, but for holding it with gentle hands, for letting it move through you without needing to fix it or fast forward to a happy ending. Because not every ending is loud. Sometimes it's a whisper. A door closing quietly behind you. A kettle whistling in the next room. The rustle of your dog's collar as they nudge your hand, reminding you that you're still here, still alive, still loved in small, persistent ways. I've come to believe that peace doesn't arrive like a revelation. It shows up like a routine, a morning walk, a nod from a stranger, a shared laugh over dinner. It's not about forgetting the pain. It's about remembering who you became because of it. So, if you've ever been the woman left behind, the one others misunderstood, the one they turned into a villain just to feel safe, you're not alone. You're not the headline. You're not their version. You're yours. And maybe like me, you've stood in front of a mirror and whispered, "I don't want this." But you took one more step anyway. That matters. That counts. So tonight, I hope you rest. Let the wind hum outside your window. Let your breath settle like dust on a bookshelf. Let your heart unclench just a little. You're not broken. You're rebuilding. And sometimes the most beautiful chapters are the quiet ones no one else claps for. Sleep well, my friend. You've earned it.